Welcome to the Table Podcast series with Bridget Johnson. Each month, we give you game-changing conversations about K-12 education and leadership. Join us as top educators, field experts, and administrators share actionable strategies to transform your school community. Let's dive in.
Welcome to The Table, the podcast where student life professionals, educators, and changemakers come together to share stories, insights, and ideas for building communities where everyone belongs. I'm your host, Bridget Johnson. I am excited to welcome Meredith Herrera to the show. Meredith is a nationally sought-after certified executive coach and board certified coach with nearly 20 years of senior leadership experience. She specializes in supporting historically marginalized leaders, including women, BIPOC, and neurodivergent leaders, helping them navigate complexity with clarity, confidence, and authenticity. Today, we're going to talk about leading from the middle, how to navigate up, down, and across your organization where you're not at the top of the org chart, but still deeply responsible for moving work forward. Meredith, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I am, we are recording on Friday, and I am really enjoying that it's Friday. It has been a long week. A long week talking to a lot of middle managers. I am ready for the weekend. I love your intro, by the way. It's so thoughtful. Love that intro.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I too am ready for the weekend. It is Friday and a little bit later here for me than you. So I'm closer to the weekend than you are. So I am ready. So let's jump right in if you don't mind. So we're talking about this concept of leading from the middle. What does that actually mean? And why does it feel different or harder than other leadership positions?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, first of all, I think taking a step back, I think leadership is what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And all these macro and micro moves that we make in an organization communicate aspects of culture. So leadership isn't necessarily our title. You may have like positional power in an organization, but not be perceived as a leader. So that's an important distinction for middle managers who often find themselves with like a high degree of responsibility, but not always the authority or power to execute everything on their to-do list.
Right.
So I think middle managers for me are, you are in a position in the organization where you have to lead multidirectionally. You said it in your intro. And you're often in a role of translating sort of big picture goals, big picture ideas into strategy, into execution. And you're kind of I think middle managers are the connective tissue of an organization.
Yes.
They have to be
That's a good word. I like that phrase, connective tissue.
Connective tissue. So you have to sort of take that thing that happened in the senior admin meeting and bring it back to your department or your deans or your math teachers and actually make that lovely idea work on a Tuesday for your team in a way that doesn't make them roll their eyes at you. So
right.
I think that's how I define middle management. And then, what is challenging is sort of what I said earlier, that it's a role that has a lot of strain on it from a lot of different directions.
Sure.
And, the research kind of bears this out. There is a lot of research on mid-level leaders, and they often feel caught between sort of senior expectations higher up on the org chart, and then the needs of the team that often they're like managing. And so I also think because you're kind of in the middle of an organization, it can often feel like your work as a leader goes unseen.
Yep.
So I think lack of recognition is part of what makes it hard. Yeah, I mean, I could go on, but I'll pause there.
Okay, that's fine. And so I know you work with a lot of leaders in this space. And so what are the most common challenges you hear from people who are leading from the middle?
Yeah, I think it's often the scope of the role and the scope of the authority is poorly defined. So let's take classic example in a school setting, a department chair.
Yep.
A department chair is in charge of stuff. Like,
yes.
People look to the department chair to do the things.
Yeah.
Often, let's say there's a big school-wide curricular initiative. Now that department chair is tasked with sort of implementing that, or there's a big schedule change, and now all of a sudden we have to rethink our scope and sequence in the middle school. So their job is to sort of hold that strategic initiative, translate it into day-to-day action for their team, which inevitably is going to produce different kinds of feelings in the people that they manage.
Sure.
Solicit information, maybe run it back up the chain of communication. And so I think that when you have a role like a department chair where you're kind of sort of given sort of authority, but not really, like that's a lot of department chairs, it can make it can lead to confusion
Mm-hmm.
about who holds what, who when does, what gets done and when. I think
Yep.
it can lead to unrealistic expectations. I think it can lead to like frustration on behalf of the middle manager because they feel like they're working so hard to get something done or communicate something from their team and like they're
Mm-hmm.
just speaking into the void. I also think middle managers have to deal with the most bureaucracy in an organization.
That's
And
fair. Yeah.
that's, I don't know anybody who loves bureaucracy. Who's like, okay, before we do this thing that we know, before we can make these changes to advisory that I know is going to be really good for kids, and I'm the dean of students. Well, first I need to meet with my division director, and then I need to make sure that the division director thinks it's aligned with the other division director's advisory programs. And then I have to meet with the comms director to figure out how we're going to roll this out to parents. And then I have to meet with the athletic director because it might mean that every other Thursday the athletes have to stay 5 minutes longer, right? It's a lot
Yeah,
of coordination.
a lot. And no one talks about that juggling, and that's a skill that sometimes people don't feel like they, or is not, what's the word I'm looking for, don't kind of think about or feel like they need when you're in those positions. But you absolutely, it's critical to doing your job well. And then when you don't have it, it just makes life a little bit more difficult, right?
I think middle managers are, this might be a weird analogy. It's like they're like the athletes of the organization. They're
Oh, say more about that.
they're agile to be successful in that role because you may have limits to your actual like positional authority. And to
Uh-huh.
get something done, you have to run it through a whole bunch of other offices on campus.
Right.
You have to be incredibly flexible, agile. You have to be willing to pivot, change your mind, solicit new feedback, and do all of that in a way where you remain emotionally constant. Uh, you're not taking things personally. You have successful middle managers to me are, I really do think that that's why I describe them as connective tissue. They're glue.
Yeah, absolutely glue. And that's something I often talk about student life professionals being the glue because they're kind of the behind the scenes folks doing that work that no one really champions. But when it goes wrong, everyone is ready to point the fingers, right?
So
Oh my gosh. And so, in my intro, I talked about us, you middle managers having to navigate up, down, and across. So let's talk a little bit about navigating up first. What does it look like to lead well when you're reporting to others and don't have final decision-making authority?
yeah, I think so. Leading up, I think what's critical for that is to be, I actually think it's critical in every situation. Whether you're leading up, down, or across an organization, I think a successful middle manager is one that stays very values aligned, very kind of mission forward. They're demonstrative about how the thing they want to get done connects to mission. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important. I think it's something that they are, when you're managing up specifically, you want to make, I always say this, like you want to make it an easy yes. So whatever it is you're trying to get across the finish line, or whatever is coming from your team that you're kind of now tasked with shepherding,
Mm-hmm.
working with your team or working individually or other lateral middle managers in the organization to position it in such a way that if I'm your manager, if I'm your boss, if I'm the associate head or the head, I can say yes. So that
Mm-hmm.
makes us think about, okay, well, what are the conditions in which it makes it easier for heads or associate heads or division directors to say yes? Okay, well, when you come to me with solutions, when you've anticipated resistance in each demographic of the school, students, parents, faculty, staff, you've shown me the plan for that resistance, then
Mm-hmm.
I may not know if this initiative will be successful or not, but I'm like, oh, they got it.
Yeah, right.
They're on it. They haven't missed anything. I think the other thing I would say for middle managers is it's not about doing big dramatic things. It's really about the consistent behaviors day in and day out that sort of shape the weather around you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, and then something that you were sharing earlier, something that I see a lot in middle managers because it's a uniquely stressful role in a school is something called anticipation defeat.
Hmm.
So sometimes when I'm, so we want, if I want my boss to say yes to something, I kind of intellectually know that I should be solution oriented, right?
Right.
And I also know that I want them to understand the risks that they might be undertaking or maybe the consequences, right? But I don't want to name all the reasons why it's not going to be successful
Right.
in advance before we've like road tested it, tested
Right.
everything. And I see this a lot in complex schools, right? So let's take a thing as an example. We need to have alignment in our assessment policy in the upper
Okay.
school. Okay. Well, let's just like, okay, so that's going to involve department chairs. It's probably going to involve like an academic dean or director of studies. Maybe there's like a director of teaching and learning. That's the goal. And maybe the director of teaching and learning has formed a committee. And the goal is that by the end of this committee, we have new alignment about an assessment.
Okay.
Manager, if I'm sort of like positioning it with okay, this is our goal. And like, I understand that here are the constraints and here's why this, here's what we tried before. And all I'm doing is sort of naming all of the possible potential reasons this will not work. And that's how I'm like leading. It's going to be hard to be effective. And it's
Right.
not that it's wrong because probably what's being said in that meeting is very valid. So I think when middle managers are taking new initiatives on and they're trying to manage up and communicate, say what they want to, or make proposals, it is important to anticipate risk, but it's important to create an architecture of implementation that allows for beta testing.
Hmm.
Like we will try a thing. We're going to see how that goes
Yep.
in the first quarter of the school year. And then we're going to meet quarterly to adjust what we need to adjust over time. I think that's something that I think is really important when middle managers are trying to communicate up is that they communicate that it's not about presenting on like this silver platter, this like perfect initiative.
Right.
It's presenting a really robust and sound process.
Mm. So when you have, middle managers who need to advocate for their teams or their ideas or kind of necessary changes, which could also happen kind of during some of those processes,
Yeah.
how do you coach folks to do that without damaging their relationships with those above them?
So the question is like, how do you manage your team?
No, if you need to advocate for your team, so if there's something that your team actually needs, how do you advocate that up without kind of damaging relationship with your boss? Because it might be something that your boss is not doing or is neglecting, or it seems
Hmm.
like that it is a thing. Not
Yeah,
saying negatively, but I can't think of another way to kind of explain that. But it's something that could cause friction between you and your boss, even though you feel like it's important for you to advocate it from your team's point of view. Does that make
right. Right.
sense?
It does. It does. I think, I mean, a lot of this I think comes down to communication skills, being honest and consistent. It's sort of a the question underneath the question is what builds trust. Because if I have trust in a relationship, then I'm more tolerant of someone coming to me and saying, "Hey, that thing you did last Tuesday, that was funky and nobody
Yeah.
liked it. And here's why." Um, so I think things like tone, emotion, that stuff is really important. How do you show that you can hold tension between what your boss wants and what the people you supervise want? How do you move through those moments? Are you honest? And I think for me, having spent most of my career in these roles where I've had a good deal of authority up to a point,
Hmm.
um, anchor using the mission or the strategic plan or the values or your team agreements, whatever sort of governing principles guide the culture of that school, you anchoring all of it in mission, all of it in values, because that takes it out of a personal realm. Because
Right.
when people are confronted about given feedback, um, what tends to make managers react poorly, I think, to that is when the feedback feels overly personal or it's not anchored to mission. I also think there's some managing down that needs to happen because one of the mistakes I see some middle managers do is they sort of perceive themselves as a union rep. Like their job isn't to sift and sort through the competing priorities, that their only job is to sort of like be an apostle for what that team wants.
Right.
The problem with that is often, so for example, I would have class deans that I would supervise come to me or a school counselor that would come to me with a very legitimate complaint.
Sure.
There's nothing wrong with like their point is well taken. But because of their role, they don't necessarily get to experience the constraints. So school counselor might come to me and say, it's really not okay that kids are wanting to come see me and teachers are keeping them in class. Okay, that's not invalid.
Right.
They may not recognize, or what they may not be aware of is that part of why that teacher is keeping them in class instead of letting them go is because of some other academic issue that's going on with that child or with that family that they may not be aware of. So I think middle managers holding that tension, sort of being clear communicators. I really always believe in Brene Brown's sort of quote of like, clear is kind.
Clear is kind.
Clear
Absolutely.
is kind. So we have clear working norms. When I work with teams, one of the first things I do is what's our team vision? What's our team values? And how do we take that vision and the values and turn that into working agreements so we reduce confusion? And I would include senior leadership in that process.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, so to me, it's like clear expectations, clear tone, consistent communication. What's going to get you in trouble is if you get a reputation for only complaining and not bringing solutions. Gossip,
Fair. Yeah.
like you're in a meeting with your boss, they tell you no, and you go back to the department and sort of repurpose that as a way to curry favor with your department members instead of sort of holding to an integral place of like some news, it's disappointing. Let's talk about how we can work within these constraints.
Yeah. One of the things that we haven't really talked about that I think is super important for folks in this, well, I think folks in leadership, whether you're middle management or not, is the building of relationships. And how critical that is to getting work done in general. If you're not building those relationships, and we talked about trust, we did mention trust, but we didn't talk about kind of really building those relationships and the transparency that's needed, the just kind of camaraderie that's needed to get this work done. As a middle manager, I think that's something that's super important because you've got, like you said, there's so many different departments and many different areas that you have to touch, not necessarily be responsible for, but you've got to get people to kind of get on board and do the thing. And so if you're not genuinely trying to kind of broker those relationships or manage those relationships in a real way, it's really tough to be successful. And so that wasn't a question, it's kind of a statement for you, but I think it's just super important to remind people that spending some time, because a relationship building takes time. It's not just, hey, how you doing? Do this thing for me. You've got to spend that time cultivating those relationships so that when you need to ask for a favor or get the benefit of the doubt, you can have that because you spent some time kind of curating those relationships. I don't think that's talked about enough with middle managers, and I think good middle managers know how to do that, know how to kind of build relationships and make sure they're keeping all the, you talked about communication, the connective tissue, keeping people informed of what's going on as things are happening and not just coming with the decisions, helping people along the way, so that they can build that trust and they can understand kind of what's happening. They know the why behind kind of what you're doing. Not that you can always be super, like you can't tell all the details. You know, there's some
Right.
things that we can't discuss, but I do think it's important as best as you can to give people as much information as humanly possible. And so I just wanted to kind of put that out there because I just think it's important to kind of say out loud. And again, sometimes a skill that people not necessarily take for granted, but they don't spend enough time um, doing.
It, it's so important because I think this is true of in general, in work, in life, but your presence sets the tone long before your position does.
Yeah.
And middle managers in particular, they succeed not by commanding, because often they don't have the ability,
The authority to do that.
but
Right.
by inspiring, by enabling, by being constant, steadiness is really, when there's change management going on, even if we all agree the change is good, it's inevitably going to tickle people's amygdalas. So
Oh,
you
absolutely.
need a team that's going to hold steady. And I want to name something that we haven't quite talked about, but because I work with so many historically marginalized leaders, um, the leadership bar is not the same for everyone.
It's
So
true.
there are ways in which there are certain leaders that are going to find themselves scrutinized differently. I wish that wasn't the case. I wish that wasn't true. Um,
Hmm.
I became an administrator when I was 26, and I looked really young. I was really young. And you
Hmm.
better believe that I could feel people not taking before they came into my office. I was like, wow, that's powerful. So yeah, I just think that um, when you build trust, when you build relationships, people will watch you in an organization. They're going to watch what you reward. They're going to watch what you tolerate. They're going to watch what you repeat. So all of
Hmm.
those micro moves help us or hurt us, right?
Yeah.
Depending on how we navigate the situations that come up. And I think when we think about it from like a psychological safety standpoint, that's all about
Hmm.
communication, right? That's just we communicate early, honestly, and to the degree that you're able as a middle manager, and you named a real constraint of middle management, which you're often privy to information only a percentage of which you can share.
Right.
But the degree to which you can create predictability, I think predictability is a form of care for everyone,
Sure. Absolutely.
down, across.
Up, down, across.
No,
Yep. Exactly.
like I take great comfort in knowing that every morning I'm gonna have like 3 cups of coffee. That is predictable.
Yes, predictability is super important. I think that's a great segue into my next question. Just thinking about marginalized groups, you talked about being young and being a new leader, but for women and BIPOC and neurodivergent leaders, what are some of the challenges they're facing being middle managers, in your opinion?
I was just at the CATDC Women in Leadership panel,
I saw you
Northern
on that.
Virginia, and we talked about this a lot. I think the biggest one for historically marginalized leaders, for women, people of color, the double bind expectations. I was in that room full of maybe like 100 women, and I asked,
Hmm.
in response to a question that was being asked of us, I asked, okay, raise your hand if you've had the experience of being in a meeting where you say something really, cogent and thoughtful, and you feel like it just went into the void. And then maybe 5, 10 minutes later, one of your male identifying colleagues basically surfaces your
Says the
point,
same thing.
saying the same dang thing. And all of a sudden, there's like engagement and head nods and all this nonverbal and verbal communication about the brilliance of that idea that was co-opted from the thing you said earlier. And, of course, Bridget, everybody put their toes up in the air,
Oh yeah,
all
like
20.
woo.
And so I think it is real that marginalized leaders face different pressures, double bind expectations, often for women, you know, and I'm speaking in general terms, none of us women aren't a monolith, people of color are not a monolith.
Sure.
Um,
Absolutely.
but patterns I see in my coaching practice is that a lot of us have been socialized to overfunction as a way to curry favor and build
Favor.
trust. And so there's a lot of invisible labor that I think
Mm-hmm.
marginalized leaders do, some of which they have to do to be successful, some of which we are socialized to do that I spend time in coaching, sort of helping leaders unlearn.
Mm.
Um, and that labor, I mean, it's already a labor-filled role. That labor creates a different kind of internal pressure that I think can mean sometimes those leaders are more prone to burnout.
Mm. Interesting. I hadn't even thought about the burnout piece in that way. And yeah, it's because it can be a heavy lift and a burden all the time. And so you just feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, I suppose, right?
It can feel hard to shapeshift, sometimes. Like, I mean, I don't know any woman I've worked with who hasn't been phone policed at some point in her career.
Yeah.
Okay, you're navigating that and you're trying to like, and we're often very, but I want to name that also marginalized leaders, I think, possess unique strengths in this space. The ability, because often, again, I'm speaking very generally, there might be some cultural norms that influence how we show up in spaces that are assets because we might have been socialized to consider multiple viewpoints or have been forced to consider multiple viewpoints. We are
Mm-hmm.
able to often hold fast lots of different feedback loops and make sense of them. So the marginalized leaders I work with are often very good at looking at the big picture and seeing
Mm.
lots of diverse opinion and mining from that heterogeneous sort of noise, like a clear,
Mm.
consistent point. They're really
Got it.
good. Summarizers is not like the way I want to say it, but they're good at taking lots of different pieces and figuring.
Aggregating data. Is that what we saying?
Yeah, whether
Yeah.
philosophical or actual data or bringing different kinds of people together, they're often
Mm-hmm.
more sensitized to shifts in the culture. And those can be real assets.
Yeah, no, absolutely. For sure. So let's flip it to navigating down. Let's talk about that a little bit. Because leading the people who report to you can sometimes be tricky when you're also managing up and dealing with decisions you might not have made yourself. So how do you help folks think about that and manage that piece?
Yeah, I think the mistake I see there, and it's very understandable. I don't even know that I would call it a mistake, but early in my leadership career, I had a really wonderful mentor, Liz Resnick, who I worked with at Crossroads School. And she really tried to help me understand the difference between being a leader that was liked and being a leader that people trusted, would come to, and was respected. And she's like, you want to be the second one.
You absolutely. Twice on
Right?
Sunday.
Twice,
Yes.
every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Because she understood at a time that I didn't, that I was going to need to be the bearer of bad news, that inevitably. So I think as a middle manager, you have to socialize yourself to the notion that you will disappoint people.
Yes.
No leader goes through their leadership journey without disappointing people. But and most people can tolerate disappointment or tolerate not getting what they want as long as they trust the process. They've had an
Right.
opportunity to provide feedback. There's clear systems of feedback. Um, I also think something that if you want a healthy team, you've got to
Mm-hmm.
practice what you preach. So you can't be that
Yes.
leader and not be that leader that's like, I want everybody to take care of themselves. I want everybody to have a restful winter break. Meanwhile, you're firing off emails
At 10
like your
p.m.
hair's
Yeah.
on fire, right? Do that. And you can't say the amount of leaders say, well, they know that I don't expect them to do that. It's like,
Doesn't matter.
it's not, it's not
It
how.
doesn't matter.
I think being consistent, so if you're the leader that says one thing in the meeting because you're conflict avoidant, because you're
Mm.
deliver bad news. But then outside of the meeting, you hear that like actually when the department chairs group got together, they made this totally different decision and nobody brought up that point that your history department thought you were going to bring up. That erodes trust very fast, and that is hard to regain. Um, yeah, so I think the other thing is empower your team. You
Yeah.
know, there's a lot of ways in which I think we can help people, we can build capacity and not dependency.
Mm. Yeah. So, and talking about that in terms of supporting and developing the people they lead, um, w- what are the things that what are the key things? Because I don't want to, because some of these things that I was thinking about had
Mhm.
kind of skewed a bit negative. So I'm trying to think of kind of the positive things and what we should think about how we pour into middle managers, because I think that's super important. And so, what are the key things that you think are important when supporting and developing the people that they lead? What should middle managers keep in mind, or what should kind of be at the forefront? Delegating, I think, is one of those that you just
Middle
said. But
managers,
but
yeah,
when they're leading their teams,
got it.
what sort of things should they be thinking about when they're developing the people under them?
Yeah. Okay. So real tactical stuff. This is like not sexy, but I think super important.
No, so that's important tools. We need some
Yeah.
tools.
You need to have a tight meeting. Like you, first of all, the amount of teams that are expected to do things in a coordinated way that never meet blows my mind. So as a middle manager, I want to make sure that I am meeting regularly with my whole team.
Hmm.
Make sure that I am creating a system whereby everybody gets access to an agenda in advance where they have an opportunity to provide feedback. There's a consistent way we do an agenda. So we're not just coming into the meeting like in the first 5 minutes thinking about what's on top of our heads. Like we're
Right.
organized. I am having one-on-one meetings with everybody I supervise on a regular basis. And like that
Yes.
interval of time, I think varies a lot depending on if these are folks that are very new to you, you probably want to meet with them more frequently. And I am structuring those one-on-one check-ins um less about the work. Hey, give me the update on what we're thinking about for like summer programs or whatever. And
Yeah.
those one-on-one meetings are about relationship. Tell me tell me where what a successful year would look like for you.
Yeah.
How do you like to receive feedback? Uh,
Hmm.
if we run into a situation where I feel that you've acted in a way that's not mission aligned, what would be the best way for me to bring that to your attention? Right, to really get to know the people on your team. Um, and to provide them with formal and real opportunity to give you feedback about yourself, right? Like,
Absolutely.
what am how am I supporting you well? What are ways in which I am not supporting you well that I need to be more mindful of? If I could change one thing about the way that I am leading this team that would have the most impact, what would that be? So I think and it's treating those meeting times, and this is hard, I know in school, it's as sacrosanct.
Is, but but still so important. Yes, I was someone that I meetings, yes, not meeting for the sake of meeting,
Correct.
but everyone we need to meet. Like we're not just gonna go out here willy-nilly. Like yeah, and meeting doesn't say hi in the hallway. That's not a meeting. Like, some people, I see my people all the time. That's great. But did you meet? Did you sit down and talk about the things? Did you follow up on the thing that you said you were going to follow up on? Are you holding people accountable? And are you doing that consistently across the members of your team? I
100%.
also think it is super important. So, now
Can
let's talk a little bit oh, yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to add one more thing because a
Yeah.
lot of managers end up moving into positions of authority where they are now tasked with supervising people that used to
Saying they're friends.
be. So this is why structure can really give you some air cover as a middle manager. So anytime so when we think about high performing teams that really do well, they
Hmm.
are organized, they have regular meetings like we talked about. They have clear roles and responsibilities. So we know who's doing what in our
Yep.
department. And they also have clear team agreements. I am such a nag about team agreements. So boring. It's so simple and straightforward, but it's really important. And they have clear
Important.
values, right? They have values as a team that we've co-created. That's why I do a lot of
Hmm.
like start of year retreats with teams so we can kind of put those puzzle pieces in place. But anyway.
Sure. No, that's and that's a great point because that's one of the things I hear about often, especially with the student life position, dean of students in particular. They are promoted from within a lot of times, and now they end up managing or it's a cross collaboration with their peers and trying to get people to do things or telling people no, and that's where it can be really tricky, and people struggle with that
Mhm.
a lot. For sure. So I'm glad that you brought that up. So, but that's a great transition in talking about navigating across, working with peers and colleagues in other departments or people at similar levels. And so, what makes that challenging? I mean, I know, but let's just put it out there.
What makes navigating across challenging?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Where to start?
I know, right?
Okay, we'll
All
start
the things.
because you and I are educators, we're starting an academic place. So there is a lot of research on the middle management. And one of the, when in complex organizations, usually organizational dysfunction or failure happens at the handoff between a thing.
Mm,
Not at the top, not at the bottom, but at the handoff. So, right, let's go back to that example where I want to change my advisory program, and it means I have to coordinate with all these other offices across the campus. Well, it's not going to get done if I'm not like effective at being organized and doing that in a timely way. If I
hmm
haven't seeded the ground and built relationships with all of these people. Like if I'm about to go ask my facilities director for a whole bunch of stuff in 2 days, I better have a good relationship with them
Right.
or make the facilities guys mad. um, and so I think, and we need to name that most school initiatives require cross-department coordination. I'd be hard pressed to think of
There's not one.
they require coordinating with lots of different offices. So, and because these are people who maybe in the org chart are your peers, it's not about ordering anybody to do anything, it's
Right.
about influence. So,
Yeah.
I think one of the best things leaders can do is build influence in an organization and build power in an organization. And I use power in a way, like sometimes I think, especially for women and people of color, power gets sort of like co-opted in a negative way, the way the word ambition gets co-opted. And I
Mm,
get power in terms of like, I have the capacity and confidence to make things happen even when I don't have the title.
yep.
And that's a lot of relationship building. And mm, it's getting your ego out of the way.
Yes, that's a great point. Getting your ego out of the way, so important because um,
It's
it could
hard
really
work.
just derail all the things.
It sure can. I mean, I've worked with people where I'll just be very honest. I've worked with people, other educators, where I have really wondered at the end of the day, I'm like, do you like children? Like,
Mm,
where they are so philosophically different from me as an educator. But in order to get a thing done, we have to find a way to collaborate. I don't have to go to happy hour with them, but
no,
I can't engage that person with ego, right? Oh, my philosophy's better. I'm more experienced at this than you, so you should just listen to me. That doesn't usually go over well.
not really.
When we think about, okay, and I always ask leaders when they're in that place, I often ask them, well, think about some of the successful relationships in your life. What builds where you have to kind of partner with someone to get a thing done. It could be a sibling, it could be a parent, it could be a spouse, it could be just a friend planning a trip. What facilitates that going well?
Yeah.
The ingredients that make that go poorly.
No, good questions asked. And one of the other things I wanted us to kind of talk about just a little bit, we always talk about, especially for, students, making them feel seen, supported, and heard or valued slash empowered. And so, and I talk about that a lot in terms of, leadership and psychological safety.
Mhm.
That's how can middle managers do that with their peers? Because I think that's important too,
Mhm.
because they aren't necessarily leading them, but they need to work with them. They may need to kind of manage them in some ways. It might be a kind of like a dotted line, is what I like to call in terms of the connection and getting them to either do something or not do something. So how can middle managers do those things with their peers and colleagues?
Yeah, I think I know I sound like a broken record, but I
No?
return to some version of defining scope. We
Okay.
have to have clear understanding of who does what, where does my work start and stop, where do you pick up
Mm,
that baton, and where does your work start and stop? So when there's role confusion, it often leads to frustration. So I think being clear about, right, clear as kind, being
clear
clear
as kind. Yep.
scope of the work. Okay, being clear about timelines. For example, I'm working with someone in a student life role, and they have to. It's a middle and an upper school campus, and they're charged with basically redoing the entire wellness architecture of the school, which includes everything from advisory to how they intervene with students who are in high states of acuity for one reason or another. It's a massive project. It requires tremendous amount of coordination. Um, and they're having some trouble because there's some folks around campus who don't see social emotional intervention with the same degree of urgency that they do. Um, and they're presenting something. And one of the things we're talking about is like, okay, there's a lovely slide deck, looks great, real tight. What's the follow up? By when is that going to happen? Have we
Mm-hmm.
communicated that? To whom is that happening? If I am the director of institutional research, and this touches me in some way, but it's sort of ancillary, do I have a clear process? Like, oh, I know that I have to make these decisions by this timeline. I may or may not like it, but if I know what my role is, if I know what my responsibility is, if I know what you
Uh-huh.
expect of me, people can't be successful when the expectations are fuzzy. So I think that's it. And then I
Okay.
reliability. If you say you're going to go do a thing, the AD comes to you and says, Bridget, I want to help you out, but in order to do that, I need you to go talk to so and so and get this information from me. And if you could get that to me in the next couple of days, then I got you. And you don't do that, or you take do that, or you feel grumpy that you were asked to do that, you may be right, capital R, but it won't be
But yeah, no, for sure. So if someone is struggling in a middle leadership role right now, what's one mindset shift or practice that could help them feel more grounded and effective?
Hmm. Hmm. I would say grounding yourself by asking yourself regularly and often these three questions.
Okay.
Um, what can I decide? What can I influence? And what do I need to stop owning?
Okay.
I
I
think
like that.
middle managers kind of they often, because things are coming at them from everywhere, they carry responsibility for things that they don't control.
Control. Mm-hmm.
They may have influence. So I think shifting from trying to, middle managers rarely have total control of outcomes.
Right.
So shifting from how do I like get exactly this outcome that I want, which probably won't be able to do because it's just a complex
Right.
task in a complex system, to focusing more on what is my sphere of influence? What can I influence? So how do I position myself instead of like just constantly trying to prove myself? How do
Mm.
I position myself? Um, and stop overworking.
Stop overwork. Just stop it, right?
White space in your calendar. If you have,
Oh,
I'm joking, but I'm not. Like if you have
no, no, no. That's important.
eaten lunch by yourself or with your colleagues without also checking an email, without also like proctoring a test, without like if you just have, you need to stop doing that because
Yeah.
it's sustainable. And that's a good example of like when insecure leadership takes hold. So insecure leadership is I have to do all the things all the time for all the
All the time for all the
Let
people.
anybody see me sweat? Go take your lunch.
Go take your lunch. Meredith, what keeps you passionate about coaching leaders in the middle?
Oh, I love it. They're so fun. Well, I think it's complex work, and I think
Mm,
just so interesting and stimulating. And I love working with leaders who are eager to, they're problem solving these really interesting dilemmas all the time. And it's often a band in a school leadership that gets the least amount of support. But to me, those are like your frontline soldiers. They are doing
absolutely.
the work. And so just being able to help, it's kind of like why I like working with kids. At the end of an interaction with a kid, and when I was a dean of students or when I was a college counselor, when I was an academic dean, I'm like, oh wow, I'm watching you graduate and you're like a real person who has like skills that you were a unmade bed
Hot mess.
in your. And adults are a little different. They're full people with lots of capacity. Get them to feel like a sense of empowerment that even if they confront a novel situation and they're not sure, there's not a clear answer, which is the case for almost all middle managers most of the time, they
Right.
feel this, they're like, I got this. I can do this. I can figure this out. I trust my ability to build relationships. I trust my ability to communicate with my team. I trust that I'll know how to sift and sort between what's within my control and what's within my influence. And I just find that work of supporting educators in that way deeply vocational.
Yeah.
Um, I just think it's like the most important thing that we can do. And I always used to say that there's a bilateral relationship between the health of our student populations and the health of our adult
Oh,
population.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So this to me is a way to continue building inclusivity and belonging and helping middle leaders feel seen and supported so they can do their best work. And it's just fun. I have a lot of
Well,
fun doing
well, yay. I'm glad you have a lot of fun doing it. Is there anything that we haven't touched on today that you think is really important for people leading from the middle to know or to remember?
it. So yeah, there's one thing I'll say. If you're a middle leader and you're listening to this and you're like, okay, ladies, that sounds nice, but I feel really stuck. Um, and I don't know that I have any influence.
Mm-hmm.
I do this activity, this power mapping activity, where you're like, just, I don't feel like I can get this initiative across the finish line, or I don't know, who to go to. And it's basically just a series of questions where you ask, who already trusts me? Where do I know my input shapes decisions, even if it's indirect? When things get complicated, who comes to me? Who seeks me out? And where am I spending energy and getting very little ROI?
Very little. Mm.
So I think if you feel stuck, which is like not, out of the norm for middle leaders, um, that might be something to help. And every so often doing a values clarification exercise, I think is a really,
Mm.
really good thing to do.
Okay. Awesome. Meredith, how can people get in touch with you? Tell us exactly what you help schools and organizations and folks do in their lives.
Sure. Yeah. So my work, well, they can go to my website, which is just mherrera, Mherrera consulting.com. It's probably the best way, or find me on LinkedIn. And mostly what I do is I coach leaders one-on-one. I do leadership coaching one-on-one or group coaching, so like groups of department chairs, groups of principals. And that is really focused on helping leaders build capacity, systems that sustain themselves in their leadership, and really doing good strategic work in their institutions. And then the other work that I get asked to do is work with teams. And these are teams that maybe are kind of coalescing for the first time and they need some strategic direction, some strategic guidance on sort of project mapping, basically, like what do we need to do and by when? Or these are teams that maybe have had some dysfunction or conflict, and
Mm-hmm.
or the institution is like, we need to figure this out and we need to kind of continue to move forward. And that requires some relational repair. So I also do a lot of that. Um,
Awesome.
yeah.
Great. And so thank you. Oh, it's been such a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us. This conversation about leading from the middle is going to resonate with so many people who are navigating these complex spaces every single day. And I'm
Mhm.
so grateful to have this opportunity to talk about the work and how you support them.
Well,
It's so important.
credit to you, Bridget, for creating this space because I think it's just such a your episodes are such an important resource for so many
Oh,
educators. So I'm delighted to be here and really appreciate the invitation.
oh, thank you so much. And so Meredith talked about how you can get in touch with her, and we'll include that contact information and website in our show notes. And if you're a leader in the middle feeling the weight of navigating up, down, and across, know that you're not alone, and there are people like Meredith who are here to help. And so, as we close today, just a reminder that now we are on social media. So, go check us out on TikTok and Instagram. Follow us for leadership insights, community building resources, and conversations that matter to student life professionals. Just search for the Dean's Roundtable on both platforms and join the conversation. And if you're enjoying the table, don't forget to subscribe, share it with a friend, or leave a review. It really helps more people find us. Thanks for pulling up a chair at the table today. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about, or maybe even something to try out in your own community. And as always, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time at the table.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Table Podcast Series. Is your student life program delivering on your mission? Our new K-12 student life assessment moves you beyond anecdotes to evidence-based decisions. Through comprehensive stakeholder surveys and expert analysis, you'll get concrete insights across 8 essential dimensions of student life, from culture and wellness to staff effectiveness and resource allocation. We're seeking founding partner schools to be the first to experience this transformative assessment process and help shape the future of student life evaluation. Today's episode was hosted by Bridget Johnson in conversation with Meredith Herrera, produced and edited by Andrew Sigmund, and music by PremiumBeat.com. For any questions, contact information can be found in the episode description. And, as always, thanks again for listening.